Father-in-law put his hand on my shoulder the morning of the mediation and said, "Son, we're going to make this easy for you. 3 million, clean transfer, no attorneys, no court dates. You walk away, we all move on." I looked at him. I looked at my wife sitting across the table, eyes down, picking at the edge of her sleeve. I looked at her mother, who couldn't quite meet my gaze. I said, "Okay," just like that. Her mother exhaled so fast it was almost funny. My father-in-law nodded like he'd just closed a real estate deal. My wife, Lindsay, finally looked up, and I think she expected to see something on my face. Relief maybe, or hurt, or anger. There was nothing. I'd already done the hard part months ago. Alone. At 2 a.m, sitting in my car in the parking garage of the hospital where she worked. My name is Sawyer. I'm 32 years old. I was a structural engineer for 9 years before I moved into project management. I'm not dramatic. I don't throw things. I don't yell. My dad was a quiet man who used to say that the loudest person in the room is usually the one who already knows they're losing. I kept that. It's probably the most useful thing he gave me. Lindsay and I met at a friend's wedding when I was 26. She was a nurse, funny in that dry, bone-tired way that people who work night shifts get. And she had this habit of being honest when everyone else was performing. I liked that. I fell for that specifically. We got married 2 years later in her parents' backyard in Connecticut, and for a while, a long while, I thought we were genuinely good. Then we weren't. I didn't know exactly when it changed. That's the part no one talks about in these stories. It's never one moment. It's 100 small disappearances. She stopped laughing at the same things. She started sleeping with her phone face down on the nightstand. She began working late on days she previously had off. And when I asked about it, she'd give me this look. This particular flat look. Like the question itself was an exhaustion she didn't have time for. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself this was just what happened after 5 years of marriage. I went to the gym more. I cooked more. I tried. I stopped trying in October, when I picked up her phone to call my own because mine had died, and I saw a name I didn't recognize saved under a contact she'd labeled with a flower emoji. The kind of thing that would mean nothing in isolation. The kind of thing that means everything when you've been collecting small details for 8 months. I put her phone back exactly where it was. Face down. I didn't say anything that night. Or the next week. What I did instead was call my college roommate, who is now a family law attorney in Philadelphia. We had lunch. I told him what I suspected. He told me to start documenting dates, changes in behavior, anything concrete, and to stop using our shared accounts for anything I didn't want scrutinized later. That was the beginning. It took me 6 more weeks to confirm what I already knew. I'm not going to walk through all of it. What matters is that by the time her family sat me down at that mediation table, I had a folder on my laptop that would have taken a very long time to explain to a judge. And they didn't know that. What they knew was that their daughter had told them the marriage was over, that things had been bad for a while, that it was mutual. What they knew was that they had money and I didn't come from money, and in their experience, that math had always solved problems before. 3 million was real money to me. They knew that too. I signed the separation agreement at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. I shook my father-in-law's hand. I told Lindsay I hoped she'd be okay, and I meant it, which I think confused her. Then I walked to my car, drove to the coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment, and ordered a large black coffee and sat by the window and watched it rain. I wasn't happy. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting there feeling clever. I was sitting there feeling empty in the specific way you feel empty after something you'd hoped wouldn't be true turned out to be true anyway. That feeling doesn't go away just because you were prepared for it. But underneath it, quiet and patient, was the thing I hadn't told anyone yet. 3 weeks before the mediation, Lindsay had come to me. Not to talk about the marriage. We were past that. But about a different problem. She was pregnant. 8 weeks. And there was a complication she hadn't anticipated, which was that the timeline didn't match up with a business trip I'd taken in March. She'd been in the middle of planning her exit. And suddenly, there was a variable she hadn't accounted for. She told me it was mine. She said it with total certainty. The kind of certainty that should have been reassuring but landed wrong, like someone reading a line rather than saying it. I didn't argue. I said I understood. I said we'd figure it out. What I actually did was make an appointment at a private lab in New Jersey that offered prenatal paternity testing using a maternal blood draw. Non-invasive. 8 weeks is early, but sufficient. The technology is more advanced than most people realize. They can isolate fetal DNA from the mother's bloodstream and cross-reference it against a reference sample from the alleged father. Legal, accurate, confidential. My reference sample was easy. The other sample. I'll just say that Lindsay and her family were so focused on the financial negotiation that they forgot I'd spent 5 years learning the routines of that household. I knew where her things were. I knew when the house was empty. The results were scheduled to arrive digitally, but I'd also requested a printed copy mailed to my attorney. I signed the separation agreement on a Tuesday. The digital results hit my inbox on Thursday morning, 44 hours later. I read them at that same coffee shop, at the same window table. I ordered the same black coffee. The test was conclusive. The child was not mine. I sat with that for a while. Not because it surprised me, but because there's still a gap between knowing something and having it confirmed in 12-point font in a clinical document. That gap requires a moment. I gave it one. Then I forwarded the email to my attorney with a single line. We need to talk about the separation agreement. Here's what most people don't know about separation agreements. Signing one doesn't automatically finalize everything. There are conditions. There are clauses. And when those clauses involve financial support for a child that turns out not to be yours, a child that was, in fact, used as implicit leverage during a negotiation, that agreement has problems. Her family had structured the $3 million in a specific way. Part of it was a lump sum. Part of it was ongoing support payments, framed loosely but in a way that my attorney now believed was tied to the pregnancy, not the marriage itself. If the child wasn't mine, the structure of the agreement changed significantly. My attorney filed a motion to revisit the terms on a Friday afternoon. Lindsay called me that same evening. I let it ring twice, then answered. "What are you doing?" she said. Not a question. A statement of confusion that hadn't found its shape yet. Correcting the record, I said. You signed. I signed based on information your family provided. Some of that information was inaccurate. There was a long pause. The baby is not mine. We both know that. Now the court knows it too. She hung up. Her father called an hour later. He'd moved from his usual boardroom tone into something lower, more careful. He asked if we could meet. I said yes, I'd have my attorney present. He said he'd prefer to keep it informal. I said I was sure he would. We met at a restaurant downtown. The kind of place with heavy linen napkins and lighting designed to make every conversation feel like it has weight. He brought his personal attorney, which told me the informal meeting was already over before it started. He sat down and looked at me the way powerful men look at people they've underestimated. Not with anger, with recalibration. I want to resolve this without it becoming something public, he said. I understand that. What would it take? I'd thought about this, not in a revenge fantasy way. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it practically. What I'd lost. What had been misrepresented. What I was actually owed. I was 32 years old. I had no children. I had an apartment lease and a reasonable savings account, and a job I was good at. What I'd lost wasn't money. What I'd lost was time, a version of my future, and, more concretely, a significant amount of career capital I'd spent those 5 years building partly around being a reliable, settled person rather than taking risks that might have paid off bigger. I told him I wanted the lump sum increased to $5 million, the ongoing support payments removed entirely, a signed acknowledgement from both Lindsay and himself that the child was not mine, and that no future claims would be brought against me related to the pregnancy. And I wanted his company's existing referral relationship with my firm reviewed and potentially expanded. That last one was the part he hadn't expected. I'd been doing infrastructure work for smaller developers for 2 years. His company was mid-size but well-connected, the kind of firm that when they referred you to a project, other firms noticed. I didn't want his money as charity. I wanted access that would let me build something that lasted longer than a settlement. He looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at the tablecloth. The referral piece is unusual, he said. The whole situation is unusual, I said. I'm trying to find something that works for both of us. He was quiet for a moment. The restaurant hummed around us. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no further litigation, no statements, no press. I wasn't planning on giving press statements, I said. I'm an engineer. Nobody's interviewing me. That almost made him smile. Almost. We signed the revised agreement 11 days later. It was a Tuesday, same day of the week as the original. I noticed that, but didn't say anything. My attorney shook my hand outside the building and said, "You were patient in a way that most people aren't." I said I'd had a good example. He didn't ask who. The referrals started coming in about 6 weeks later. Small at first. A warehouse retrofit in New Jersey, a parking structure in Delaware. Then a mid-rise in Philly that ran over 18 months and put my name on a project I could point to. I hired 2 people, then 4. By the end of that year, I had a small but legitimate firm with my name on the door and a backlog of work. I didn't do anything with Lindsay's story. I didn't need to. The pregnancy became visible, the timeline became visible, and people who knew them started doing arithmetic the way people always do. I heard through mutual connections that the relationship with the child's actual father had ended before the baby was born. I heard that her parents had quietly rerouted the inheritance conversation. I heard a lot of things I didn't ask to hear because that's how it goes when something falls apart in a social circle. I felt sad about some of it, genuinely. Not vindicated. Sad. Because the version of her I'd fallen for, the honest, dry, bone-tired, real version, that person had existed. I hadn't imagined her. Somewhere in the middle of whatever happened, that person had made a series of choices that buried her, and whatever she was left with after all of it wasn't something I'd wished for her. About 8 months after the revised agreement, I was on a job site in Trenton, walking a concrete pour with my site supervisor when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I'd deleted but recognized. "I heard your firm is doing well." I read it once. I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about what I actually needed to say. I thought about my dad's old line, "The loudest person in the room." I put my phone in my pocket and went back to watching a pour. She sent one more message the following week, 2 sentences asking if I'd ever thought about what I could have said differently. I read it. I sat with the question honestly, because I think that's the only way to sit with a question like that. The answer was yes. There were 100 things I could have said differently. There were moments early on where I might have reached her and chose silence instead. There were arguments I walked away from that maybe needed to stay open. I wasn't blameless in the distance that grew between us. I know that. But what I couldn't have said differently was the part where she looked at me across that mediation table and let her family use a pregnancy they knew was not mine as leverage. That part I could not have changed because I wasn't the one who made that choice. I didn't respond to her message. The firm turned 3 years old last spring. We threw a small party in the office. My team, my attorney, a few subcontractors I'd worked with from the beginning. Someone brought a cake that said W+S Engineering in blue frosting, which was not the logo we used, but I kept a photo of it anyway. My site supervisor, a guy named Roderick, who's been in construction for 25 years and has seen everything, pulled me aside at some point in the evening and said, "You seem different from when I first met you." I asked him what he meant. He shrugged. "Lighter," he said. "Like something you were carrying got set down." I told him that was a pretty good way to put it. I wasn't carrying it anymore. Not the marriage, not the betrayal, not the mediation table with the linen napkins and the man who thought 3 million would be the end of the sentence. None of it had disappeared, but it had been reclassified. Background material. Historical record. The foundation, not the structure. The structure was the work. The people I hired. The projects I could point to and say, "That's real, that exists, that holds something up." I went home that night and sat on my apartment balcony. Different apartment now, higher floor, facing west, and let the city make its noise while I finished a beer I didn't really need but wanted anyway. It was a Tuesday. I'd noticed it was Tuesday again before I even checked. Some things stay with you for no good reason. But most things eventually just become part of the ground you're standing on. You stop noticing them the way you stop noticing the walls of a room you've lived in for years. I stopped noticing it somewhere around then. I signed those papers on a Tuesday and walked out of that room like a man who already knew the story wasn't over. I just had the patience to wait for the next chapter. I think about Roderick's word a lot. Lighter. He said I seemed lighter, like something I'd been carrying got set down. At the time I just nodded because it was late and there was cake and I didn't want to turn a small party into a therapy session. But I've turned the word over since then, and I think he was right, and I think the reason he was right is something worth saying out loud. There's a version of the story where I come out looking clever, where I planned everything, anticipated every move, executed it all perfectly. I've told parts of it to people and I can see them building that version in their heads. The patient guy who outmaneuvered a wealthy family and walked away with more than he came in with. That version is easier to package. It has a shape. But the truth is messier. The truth is, I spent months being genuinely sad. I spent months second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd missed something I could have fixed, wondering if the distance between Lindsay and me was something I'd contributed to more than I wanted to admit. I did the documentation and the legal prep and the quiet evidence gathering while also being a person who came home to an apartment that felt too big and ate dinner alone most nights and called his mom more than he had in years just to hear a familiar voice. What I learned, not from this situation specifically, but from living through it, is that intelligence without honesty is just a more sophisticated way of lying to yourself. I could have used everything I knew to negotiate from a place of anger, to maximize damage, to make sure Lindsay and her family felt every consequence of what they'd done. I had the leverage for it. I chose not to, not because I'm a good person in some tidy moral sense, but because I understood, slowly, painfully, that the kind of life I wanted to build couldn't be built on the foundation of someone else's suffering. You can win a fight completely and still lose the years you spent fighting it. The paternity test wasn't revenge, it was a correction. There's a difference, and it matters. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. Correction is about making sure the record is accurate so that everyone, including you, can move forward from something true rather than something manufactured. I didn't want Lindsay to suffer. I wanted the agreement I signed to reflect reality. Those are different things. The negotiation with her father was the same. I didn't ask for the referral network to punish him. I asked for it because it was the thing that would actually change my life, and because I respected him enough, even after everything, to offer him something that wasn't just humiliation. He got a quiet resolution. I got access. We both moved on. That's not weakness. That's the kind of thinking that builds something that lasts. What I know now, that I didn't fully understand at 32, is that character isn't what you do when things are going well. It's what you do in the parking garage at 2 in the morning when you've just found something out and nobody is watching and nobody would blame you for falling apart. It's whether you pick up the phone to call a lawyer or pick up the phone to say something you can't take back. It's whether you use what you know to build something or to burn something down. Sawyer. The name on the door of that firm means something to me, because I put it there during the worst period of my adult life and kept showing up anyway. Not because I had a plan, because I didn't have anything else to do except work and wait and trust that clarity was coming even when it wasn't visible yet. It came. It always does, if you stay still enough to let it catch up.